Every few years, someone publishes a paper, a tool, or an analysis that shaves another sliver off Monero's privacy guarantees. And every time, the community argues about whether it's a real break or an edge case, whether it affects today's transactions or only historical ones, whether the protocol's next upgrade will close the gap. I want to walk through the current state of that argument, because the story of Monero's traceability is more nuanced than either side of it tends to admit. Let me set a baseline first. Monero is not Bitcoin. On a Bitcoin blockchain, every transaction is a public record. Sender address, receiver address, amount, timestamp. Chain analysis companies have built their entire industry on reading that record. Monero was designed to break every one of those assumptions. Sender addresses are obscured by ring signatures, receiver addresses are obscured by stealth addresses, and amounts are obscured by confidential transactions backed by bulletproofs. On paper, a Monero transaction reveals almost nothing. In practice, the protocol is only as strong as its implementation, its defaults, and the surrounding network stack. Each of those layers has been studied, and each has produced findings that narrow the anonymity set in specific conditions. Start with ring signatures. When you send a Monero transaction, your real input, the actual coin you're spending, is bundled together with decoys, other on-chain outputs that could plausibly be the one you're spending. To an observer, any of the inputs in the ring could be the real one. The protocol does not reveal which. The size of the ring has evolved over the years. Early Monero allowed user-selectable ring sizes, including a minimum of 0, which meant some transactions had no decoys at all and were fully traceable. That era is over. Since the 2017 hard fork, all transactions have a mandatory ring size. The number has been raised progressively. As of the current protocol version, ring size is 16, meaning your real input is one of 16 possibilities. 16 sounds like a lot. It's not statistically if the decoys are not chosen well. This is where the interesting research lives. A 2017 paper by Andrew Miller and collaborators, titled An Empirical Analysis of Linkability in the Monero Blockchain, showed that in the pre-hard fork era, 90% of transactions could be de-anonymized by applying simple heuristics to decoy selection. The most important heuristic was the newest input guess. In early Monero, wallets tended to pick the most recently created output as the real input, because that was what the user was most likely spending. An observer could therefore guess that the newest output in the ring was the real one, and be right most of the time. Monero fixed this by improving the decoy selection algorithm. Modern wallets pull decoys from a distribution that mimics the typical age of real spent outputs, which is called a gamma distribution because that's the statistical curve it follows. This makes decoys harder to distinguish from real inputs based on age alone. But decoy selection is still an imperfect art. Research from groups at Carnegie Mellon and CipherTrace, a chain analysis firm, has continued to demonstrate that under specific circumstances, decoy selection reveals more than it should. If a wallet is implementing the decoy distribution slightly differently from the reference implementation, if an output included in a ring has a distinctive history, if a user is repeatedly spending from the same wallet, with correlated timing, the effective anonymity set shrinks below the nominal ring size. There's another attack vector that gets less attention, which is known spent outputs. If an output has already been spent in an earlier transaction, it shouldn't appear as a decoy in later rings. But sometimes it does. When a wallet includes a known spent output as a decoy, analysts can eliminate it from consideration. Eliminate enough decoys across a large enough set of transactions, and rings start collapsing. In 2018, researchers documented that a meaningful fraction of pre-hard fork transactions had rings that could be fully resolved through this elimination method. Current rings are harder to attack this way, but the attack is not zero. There's always some probability that the analyst can narrow the ring to a smaller effective set. Now let's talk about the second layer, network-level observation. This is where Monero's privacy is most often overestimated. Monero transactions, like all cryptocurrency transactions, are broadcast through a peer-to-peer network. When you broadcast a transaction from your wallet tells at least one node, and that node propagates the transaction to its peers. An observer running many nodes across the network can watch for which node first announces a given transaction, and infer that the node closest to the origin is the one owned by the sender, or one hop from it. This is called a network-level de-anonymization attack, and Monero addressed it with Dandelion++. a propagation protocol adopted in 2020. Dandelion++ sends transactions through a random path of peer-to-peer relays in a stem phase, keeping the transaction invisible to most of the network for a few hops before entering a normal flooding phase. This breaks the first broadcaster heuristic. Dandelion++ is a real improvement. It is not perfect. If the observer controls enough relays, the stem phase becomes shorter, in practice than in theory, and the origin leaks. Practical deployments of Dandelion++ and other cryptocurrencies, including Bitcoin's experimental rollouts, have found that adversary-controlled relays reduce its effectiveness in proportion to their share of the network. Monero's relay population is smaller than Bitcoin's, which makes the relative impact of a controlled subset potentially larger. There's also a simpler class of attack, which is IP leakage. If you run a Monero wallet without an intermediary, your wallet connects to a remote node to sync the blockchain and submit transactions. That remote node sees your IP address. If the remote node is run by a chain analysis firm, they have linked your IP to the transactions you submit. The defense is to run your own node or to access the network through Tor or I2P, both of which Monero supports. Many users do neither because it's inconvenient, which means a meaningful portion of network traffic leaks IP addresses to remote node operators who may or may not be adversarial. Now the third layer, which is the one most likely to bite real users: exchange correlation. Most people acquire Monero by buying it on an exchange. Most people also eventually sell it on an exchange or trade it for something else. Those exchange events are choke points. The exchange knows who you are because of Know Your Customer requirements. The exchange knows which Monero addresses you deposited from and withdrew to. Even if the Monero blockchain itself reveals nothing, the exchange's records fill in the gaps at both ends of a transaction flow. A user who buys Monero on an exchange, transfers to a personal wallet, does some transactions, and then sells on another exchange has created a trail that, while not visible on-chain, is visible to anyone who can subpoena or breach the exchanges involved. Chain analysis firms have been building relationships with exchanges for years, precisely for this reason. The Monero protocol does not protect against this kind of off-chain correlation. It was never designed to. There's also a technique called taint analysis that applies even to Monero in a limited way. If law enforcement knows that a specific output was involved in a known incident, and they can observe how that output propagates through rings as a decoy, they can sometimes narrow the possible spenders by looking at timing and associated metadata. The analysis is probabilistic, not deterministic. It produces suspicions, not proofs. But those suspicions are sometimes enough for investigative purposes. Let me also mention the Chainalysis claim, because it's relevant. In 2020, Chainalysis reportedly claimed internal capability to trace some Monero transactions. Documents leaked through a U.S. government contracting process suggested limited de-anonymization in specific scenarios. The Monero community's response was that the claimed capability likely relied on the older, weaker protocol versions or on exchange-side correlation rather than a fundamental break of the cryptography. That response is probably correct. The protocol has not been cryptographically broken. The environment around the protocol has weaknesses that can be exploited, and the distinction matters to users. So where does that leave the title? Is Monero untraceable? In the narrow cryptographic sense, the current protocol holds up. Ring signatures, stealth addresses, and bulletproofs have not been broken. An adversary who can see only the blockchain and has no other information usually cannot link a sender to a receiver. In the practical sense that matters for real users, Monero's traceability depends on what you do with it. Acquire it from a custodial exchange with KYC and the entry point is known. Sell it at another custodial exchange and the exit point is known. Run your wallet without Tor or I2P and your IP is known to the nodes you contact. Use a wallet that implements decoy selection poorly and your ring size is less than it appears. Generate patterns in your timing or your amounts, and behavioral analysis fills in what the protocol hides. The Monero developers are aware of all of this and continue to work on it. Seraphis, a next-generation protocol that has been in development for several years, proposes significantly larger effective anonymity sets and cleaner cryptographic primitives. Full chain membership proofs would push the anonymity set to include the entire chain rather than a ring of 16. These improvements, if and when they ship, will close some of the gaps I've described. None of that changes the current reality. Monero today is strong privacy, not absolute anonymity. The difference matters. Users who treat Monero as a cloak of invisibility make operational mistakes that the protocol can't recover from. Users who understand the layer boundaries, what's cryptographic, what's network, what's exchange-dependent, can design their usage around the actual threat surface. Practical takeaways. If you use Monero for real privacy, run your own node, always, and route it through Tor or I2P. Avoid custodial exchanges for privacy-sensitive flows. Use atomic swaps or peer-to-peer marketplaces that don't require KYC. Use a reputable wallet implementation, preferably the official one, which implements decoy selection correctly. Don't reuse addresses, which Monero handles automatically through stealth addresses but can still be broken by user behavior in some wallet UIs. And understand that the strongest link in your privacy chain is your own operational hygiene, not the protocol. The title of this piece asks whether Monero is untraceable anymore. The honest answer is that Monero was never untraceable in the absolute sense, and the gap between its marketing and its reality has always existed. What has happened over the last several years is that the academic and commercial analysis community has mapped that gap in precise detail, which is different from the protocol being broken. It's more like the fog has thinned enough for researchers to see the shape of what's still hidden and what never was. If you want the deep technical comparison between Monero and newer privacy chains like Scash, or privacy-preserving Layer 2 protocols on general-purpose chains, leave a note in the comments. That's a worthwhile follow-up because the design space has expanded, and Monero is no longer the only serious contender in the privacy coin category, even if it remains the most studied. For now, use Monero with clear eyes. It's still one of the best tools available for on-chain privacy. It's just not a magic wand.